Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today at our webinar, the Penn State Organization Development and Change Workforce Education and Development monthly webinar series. My name is Masha Ruimal, and I'm a student in Workforce Education and Development, moderating today's session alongside my colleagues Halima Hatta, who is also a student in the same program, and Nadia Waterton, a marketing communications specialist at Penn State. Today's presentation is titled Strategic Planning for the 21st Century Workforce, Harnessing Demographic Complexities of Organizational Impact, led by Dr. Wayne Gersie. Dr. Wayne Gersie is the Vice President of Communication Engagement at Michigan Technological University, a position he has held since 2020. He leads initiatives to foster cultural awareness, belonging, and partnership with underrepresented groups, securing over 15 million in external funding to support STEM opportunities. His accomplishments include developing the university's first strategic plan for engagement and belonging, as well as securing a 1.3 million Ronald E. McNair Scholarship grant for the U.S. Department of Education. Previously, Gersie served as assistant research professor and chief diversity officer at the Penn State Applied Research Laboratory and founded Oasis Strategic Consultancy, LLC. He holds a PhD in workforce education and development from Penn State and brings deep expertise in advancing organizational effectiveness through leadership, mentorship, and strategic partnership. We are delighted to have him with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wayne Gersie. Dr. Wayne, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marcia, for that wonderful welcome. I'm glad to be here. I think a big part of my introduction that I want to highlight is that I'm a proud graduate of the Penn State Workforce Education and Development Program. I think once I earned my terminal degree from this department, my trajectory, my career trajectory really took off, and I'm indebted and grateful for all the support I received from the program and the mentorship I received from all the faculty and my peers in the program. So I really wanted to give a shout out to the department and all the wonderful people who work there, not just the faculty, but also the staff and my peers who helped guide me along the way. So with that said, I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you about strategic planning for the 21st century workforce, and harnessing the demographic complexity for organizational impact. I think any organization, for it to realize its fullest potential, a good strategic plan or vision is required to achieve that. So today, I hope to talk to you about that in some context, and much of the work um, that this is grounded in comes from a book chapter that I wrote a couple of years ago in a book edited by Dr. Bill Rothwell, Jamie Campbell, and Philip Ely on organizational change. Um, so the goal for today's workshop is to explore strategic planning um, in the context of today's workforce, um, understand how HRD and OD strategies for leading and consulting across multiple demographic dimensions take place, and apply an 11-step strategic planning process to real-world organizational challenges that most organizations are confronted with on a daily basis. So I want to start by talking about the 21st century workforce. Things are changing fast because the population is growing fast. And with a growth in population and the world becoming less isolated and more accessible, you're going to inherently have these increased demographic complexities. People live longer. The patriarchal workforce is changing, and there's representations from multiple identities, not just in relation to race and gender, but also ethnicity, skill diversity, and also um, generational diversity. So with that comes different demands because the workforce is no longer monolithic. And when you have a diversity of talent in a workforce, you're inherently going to have concerns related to flexibility, inclusion, and continuous development. There's competing interests and competing needs from that diverse workforce. So it has clear implication for human resources development and organizational development initiatives and strategic planning. So strategic planning becomes more and more important as part of this of these challenges. So sorry, I wasn't pushing ahead on my slides, but I got it now. So good strategic planning is an essential part for organization, and why it's important is necessary to explore. Good strategic planning in organization allows the organizations to have clear direction and alignment within its organizational mission. One of the questions I always ask when I get invited to lead strategic planning consulting in different organizations is to all the stakeholders is what's your company's or your organization's strategic plan? And if they don't know the answer, then there's a problem. You should be able to rattle off at least one or two strategic goals related to your organization, because the reason why you show up at work every day is to perform to those goals and to be assessed against those goals. Because if these goals are well aligned, then you have specific organizational outcomes that are beneficial, productive, and really impact the bottom line. If you don't know what you're performing to, it becomes really difficult to have those outcomes, and then you really move to more of a symbolic strategic goal rather than a structural and enduring goal that initiates outcomes and that's intentional and that produces results. Another reason why a good strategic planning process is essential, or a good strategic plan is essential, the anticipated demographic changes and market shifts demand that we're agile enough to respond to the market needs. So a good strategic plan as a foundation that can then be tweaked is going to be important. If you have good strategic planning, I think inherently you can elicit efficient allocation of resources. Good strategic planning also promotes innovation and adaptability. It welcomes it, it embraces it, it nurtures it. When if a good strategic plan is from all stakeholders in the organization, it will enhance engagement and retention. People are contributing to their vision. People are contributing because the solutions that were put forth, they had stake in creating. It makes your organization also resilient in times of uncertainty. If you're proactive in your strategic planning, you don't have to be reactive to the market shifts. And furthermore, and lastly, forward-looking approaches that ensure organizational viability, if done effectively, are a big reason of why good strategic planning is essential. So why strategic planning matters in the 21st century is also fostered by how we can align workforce initiatives with organizational mission and evolving demographic realities. I talked about that a little. Different demographic realities present different competing interests and different workforce needs, and also different client needs. You want a workforce that can relate and empathize with the experiences of those who you're trying to serve. The more equipped they are to have a foundational understanding of your client or customer needs, the more you enhance your share of the market. Good strategic planning can also drive equitable performance improvements and employee engagement. So if you measure apples against apples, you can improve the outputs. And finally, it can promote innovation through diverse perspective and cultivates high-performing teams if different perspectives are leveraged in problem solving. This is not me. This is Harvard Business Review. There's studies that have consistently demonstrated that when you bring multiple perspective to problem solving, you get better outcomes. These teams actually outperform other executive teams that tend to be monolithic. I recommend to you a book by a faculty member at University of Michigan, Ann Arbor called The Difference. His name is Scott Page, and he talks about how multiple perspective and how enhance problem solving. So how does this relate to HRD and OD competencies for the 21st century? If we're leading, if we establish 21st century representative organization, these are the things and these are the reasons why 21st century perspective are important. So in the 21st century, your leadership proficiency acumen to lead multi-dimensional and multi-identity teams are essential. One second here. When you're able to meet those expectations, you also need to focus on training and development that addresses various learning styles, like with diverse workforce and diverse workforce need and the diverse training needs. You need to understand that, and you need to be able to provide multiple modalities to learning and understanding to get folks to be aligned in executing the strategic goals and plans of your organization. I recognize that I come from a print generation, and my nieces and nephews come from a multimedia generation. So they learn different. They learn through podcasts and video casts and more self-directed approaches, while I would pick up an encyclopedia off the shelf and try to learn that way. And maybe it's dating me how old I am, but the modalities are different in how people learn. So it requires a competency to understand that. The competency that's also necessary for a 21st century leader is the understanding that succession planning and bench strength development that is inclusive are not predetermined. You can't continue to anoint people for positions because they're smart or they are successful as individuals. There's more that goes into that planning. Can they work with a multi-dimensional, multi-identity workforce? We also need to recognize that a coaching approach to leadership in leading versus a directive heavy approach to leadership may not be necessary at all times. So you need to be able to be flexible to understand that spectrum of how you lead. Furthermore, change management and agility in management and leading multi-generational teams are necessary. Everything changes so quick. And we need to be able to be agile and flexible enough to manage that change as leaders. And then project management that harnesses the inclusive excellence to ensure outstanding outcomes is necessary. I use this example all the time. If you use Siri or Alexa today, you need to recognize and understand that the first Siri and the first Alexa, Siri thought I was talking to her. I'm sorry for that. didn't recognize female voices. And if I don't need you to think hard to speculate why that was the case. If certain voices aren't at the table for innovation and problem solving, you don't solve in the best manner possible. That's why harnessing inclusive excellence to ensure outstanding outcomes is necessary. So now I'd like to ask you a discussion question, and you can put your answers in the chat for this one because there's another one coming, which is more of a poll question. Um, which competencies is your organization focusing on the most? And then I'm going to ask Marcia or one of the moderators to maybe blurt out some of the answers that people mentioned. And I listed 6 here, but if there's some that I missed, feel free to share them in the chat. I'll give you a couple of minutes, and then Marcia, maybe in a couple of minutes, we can discuss what people wrote, and I can give some feedback. We are going to maybe talk about applying HRD examples. We'll talk about it some more during the poll. So when we think about applying HRD or OD examples, designing organizational representative leadership will matter. Multi-generational mentoring initiatives for an emergent or entry-level workforce and even mid-career workforce is going to be necessary. Equity-focused training and coaching efforts are going to be essential because we talked a lot about the characteristics of the 21st century workforce. It's a multi-identity workforce, and they have multiple needs and sometimes competing needs. Okay, I think I'm going to pause here because I see that there's folks interjecting. Jason Thomas Hill wrote, I hear a lot about leadership shifting to coaching mentality for their managers and above. Yeah, I think it's important that we shift to a coaching model versus a directive model. I think this generation workforce doesn't respond too heavy to a rational organizational approach. They want to contribute and they expect to contribute when they join the workforce. So top down is not as effective. Anyone else before I continue? Okay, if there's more, I'll highlight them. But in the meantime, I talked about applying HRD and OD examples to 21st century workforce. So we finished that equity focused training and coaching efforts. I personally don't like the word training because I feel that training is too prescriptive and not employee centered enough. I think if you want someone to buy into a modality or an effort or a change strategy, you need to meet them where they are. And you need to recognize that how you approach one person may not be as effective in getting the same outcomes you want for both. Because if the identities are different, if you can find a sweet spot in how you communicate and coach people through it to get the ultimate end result for everyone, then a coaching approach rather than, hey, go to training, listen to the same information that everyone's getting, and good luck in executing it after you've been trained on it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then the last bullet in applying HRD or OD examples is performance evaluation sensitive to demographic differences and representative social identities. Even how you evaluate, you can't take a cookie cutter approach because my there might not be someone else's there. And in performance management, it matters. There's this really good book that I learned and read while I was doing my PhD. It was by Jim Collins, Good to Great. And one of the things Jim Collins talks about is getting the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, but more importantly, the right people in the right seats. I think that how you evaluate performance management is part of that process. let me go to the webinar poll now. So the poll asks you to assess the following four workforce challenges. And based on the poll, it's pretty evenly distributed, with skill gaps and training needs having a slight advantage. Can you leave that poll up? Just went away.
It's already launched and we have the result.
Okay, so in terms of talent retention, 37% of the folks felt that it was important. 37% thought leveraging inclusive excellence was important. Skill gaps, 43% thought it was good, and then 37%. Okay, these are people who responded out of the folks who responded. So those are your outcome. It's pretty evenly distributed about what the pressing workforce needs are. I think it changes from organization to organization. So with that knowledge, how do you approach introducing a strategic planning process into your organization? So in the book chapter we wrote a couple of years ago, one of the things I focused on was a structured framework for demographically complex organization. And in the process, we tried to ensure that HRD and OD initiatives are inclusive, measurable, and impactful. I've had a great mentor. I don't know if he's on this call. His name is Mike Blanco, who taught me a lot about strategic planning and what it is and what it wasn't. And he has over 35 years experience leading strategic planning efforts at a large organization, primarily Penn State. So he taught me a lot about what worked and what didn't. And much of my inspiration for this book chapter was based on the things I learned from him, and I learned about strategic planning. While I'm not catching up to his level of expertise, I'm certainly closing the gap somewhat by having the privilege of what he taught me. So in this 11-step strategic planning process, I talk a lot about what is needed, and it's sequential, it's intentional, and I'm going to begin getting into it now. So the first step, the 11-step process, is really a roadmap for embedding equity and social impact into your organization. And it's really designed to move from symbolic changes to lasting organizational changes. So the first step in the process, to me, is having a good sense of what your organizational culture is. So the first step, you really need to spend a lot of time evaluating the organization culture, policies, and practices. You need to spend time identifying existing initiatives and gaps. The platforms and the modalities you can use are surveys, focus groups, and stakeholder interviews. You need to understand the internals. That's going to allow you to determine what the internal organizational strengths and weaknesses are. And subsequently, you'll be able to map the impact and equity performance metrics. There's modalities you can use to. I know in our program, PC program, we use a lot of appreciative inquiry. Some of the modalities. One of my favorite go-to approaches is some level of SWOT analysis. Here's the most important part. To me, the most important part in assessing the current state is to make sure that you have stakeholders at all levels of the organizations contributing to the assessment piece. If it's too top down, you'll miss out. If it's only bottom up, then the buy-in from leadership is going to be hard. I had a great mentor too. Actually, she's the graduate of the program. And I was this eager beaver, mid-career person who would come to her with ideas. And when she would give me ideas, she would say to me, if I thought, why aren't we doing this? This must be easy to do. And she would say to me, Wayne, from where I'm sitting, I see a lot further down the road than you do right now. When you get in my seat, you'll get it. And that person was Amy Freeman, Dr. Amy Freeman. She's on campus. She leads the Millennium Scholars Program and team. And when I got to my leadership role, I got a good understanding of what she was saying. So that's why it's important to get multi levels of viewpoints when you're assessing your current state, because I could tell you everyone from where they're sees things differently and has inherent blind spots from where they're sitting. And that's why it's important that you get a assessment that is inclusive and that incorporates multiple perspectives from all stakeholders. So once you have that thorough assessment of your organization and where it is, I call it the baseline, then you can begin thinking about defining a vision and goals. So you can begin establishing clear aspirational goals and visions that are inclusive by nature, because everyone has contributed to the baseline assessment that then allows you to begin building strategic goals. And just like you were inclusive in getting feedback in making the assessment, I think it's a benefit to be inclusive in the design of the goal. Because remember what I said earlier, the more people are able to contribute to the process, the more likely you're going to have their buy-in. Ultimately, as a leader, you will decide what the goals are going to be like, but I think they should be close to the inputs you received in designing them. I think it's important to set both long-term and short-term goals, but I think there's actually a three-part step. Like, I like a logic model approach to strategic planning, where you have short-term goals, which I call the low-hanging fruit. You have intermediate goals, and you have long-term goals. And good communication of what those goals are as a collective to your organization are important. What's even more important is that the goals are measurable and achievable. And we hear that a lot. So when you write things like, such as, I want to increase employee satisfaction, that's a pretty general goal. So you have to find a way to be able to assess what increased employee satisfaction looks like. So if the goal cannot be measured, it's hard to work towards it. You need to be able to communicate the vision to stakeholders, your vision to stakeholders for buy-in. So you got to be able to sell your vision. So I think that is a critical part of strategic planning. So the third step is identifying key stakeholders who will help you execute and map out your strategic vision. So mapping internal and external stakeholders is critical to success, including employees, leadership, community partners, and funders is also important. The people who got this purse string. You need to understand your stakeholder needs. You need to make sure what their interests are and their potential contribution, and engage stakeholders early on to build trust and collaboration. You also need to develop a plan for ongoing engagement and feedback once you launch a strategic plan. Here's the mistake I think some organizations make when they think about strategic planning. They focus too much internally in how the organization is viewed by the internal stakeholders, which is an essential part, but also how you're perceived by external stakeholders, basically your customers and your clients, is an important part of strategic planning. So getting their perspective on how they view your organization will also be important in this process. Now I'm going to go to step 4, which is conducting the gap analysis. And the gap analysis really focuses on comparing your current state of play, I'm going to call it. It allows you to identify structural, policy, and cultural gaps. Your gap analysis should also allow you to highlight areas where resources and capacity are lacking. And then from there, you're going to prioritize gaps based on impact and how feasible they are. And then you will use the findings to inform strategic initiatives and resource allocation in your upcoming strategic plan. So we think that that step is the next logical step. And then after you've developed that step, then your next step is to develop strategies and tactics. When you develop strategies and tactics, you're looking to translate goals into actionable strategies, right? So you have a vision, it's a nice piece of paper. The action step, your action plan is what's next. So identify specific initiatives and interventions that fall under a goal. Like, so here's something I want to state that I see often in strategic planning processes. Sometimes people conflate actions with strategies. So whenever you are assessing a solution, I'm going to call it, you need to identify whether it's a strategy or an action. So you can take anything. I want to give everyone a 5-year pin to celebrate their years of service in the organization. You have to determine if that's a goal or an action. And I'll give you an example. So if you give people a 5-year pen or pin, why are you doing it? If the ultimate goal is to increase employee satisfaction, then your action quickly reveals itself as an action to support a strategic goal of employee satisfaction. So this is just a simplified example, but it really differentiating between actions and goals will be important. When you identify specific initiatives and interactions and you've determined where they fit into a strategic planning process as a goal, then you need to assign roles and responsibilities for each tactic, because people are going to need to be owners of it, points of contact. Make sure the goals you state or aspire to achieve align with available resources. Do you have the resources to execute the goal? If not, they're just going to be part of a piece of paper that sits on a shelf and never gets realized. And ultimately, your goals can be infinite. They need to be finite, and they need to include timelines and measurable performance indicators. You keep me hearing coming back to measurable performance indicators. So I think we cannot lose sight of that. So then the next step in the 11-step process is building organizational capacity. So ensuring leadership and systems are ready for change. There's a collective support for this initiative. Then you need to invest in training and professional development for those who are going to help lead the sustainable changes you hope to achieve. And then develop an infrastructure to support the initiative. And the reason why infrastructure is so important, because if you want these changes to be structural and enduring, you need to have the right infrastructure to support them. And then allocate funding and other resources strategically. Everybody gets excited about a strategic goal, but one of my favorite quotes by Martin Luther King is that a budget is a moral document. So if you truly are about the goal, then you need to create the resources to support them. and they need to be structural and enduring, and they need to be long-term. Oops. Furthermore, foster a culture of accountability and continuing learning. And a culture of accountability doesn't have to be a stick. It could be a carrot. Highlight successes, highlight best practices, because when you do that, when you can show proofs of concepts that are successful, then the people who are skeptical of them being able to be realized have a real living example of how it could work when you're doing it. I am a big proponent of finding surrogates and accomplices and partners who can help me bring an idea to realization, so the folks who aren't sure can see it. In organizations, you have three types of people. You have the choir that still needs practice, you have the people on the fence, and then you have the people who are detractors and non-believers. I'm trying to get the choir to convince the people in the middle that these initiatives are worthy. And then once they are worthy, then the detractors can choose to opt in or opt out. In the end, either one is fine, because then you have the organization and the vision you want it to be, and you've established the culture that you aspire to create. The next step is in strategic planning is facilitating the strategic planning process. So anything that is a heavy lift in what strategic planning is requires a certain level of rollout and planning. So you may want to conduct some planning session with diverse stakeholder participation. Use a transparent and inclusive decision-making process when you roll it out. You have to address resistance and encourage honest dialogue. So let me say something about this. I like to talk about my mentors. One of my mentors is retired three-star Admiral Paul Sullivan. And Paul Sullivan taught me something. It's like, it's important to get input and know where the resistance is, but there's also a caveat to it. You cannot manage to outliers. So their input is important, but on a bell-shaped curve, they might be over here and the other extreme is there. So you have to try to know when to manage to the middle, and you have to know and recognize when the resistance you're experiencing is something that raises the level of consciousness of a monolithic group that wouldn't get it. So even though your representation may not be equally distributed, with the demographic shifts that are happening, you need to pay attention to something is necessary, even though the voices that are expressing it tend to be in the minority. But it goes a long way into be able to creating an environment that promotes inclusive excellence, because as your demographics are changing, the folks who are in the minority now may be a larger share of your future workforce, and they can either become your best recruiters or your worst recruiters if you don't strategically think about how you're going to support them in their ability to contribute to the performance of your organization. Because if they don't find value in the organization, they tend to leave. The other part of in facilitating strategic planning is documenting priorities, actions, and responsibility. And the last part is aligning processes with long-term social impact objectives. Now we're going to go to the next part, which is communicating your plan. One of the things I heard consistently from my mentors was, you cannot over communicate. And I'm specifically talking about Paul again. You cannot over communicate. Share the plan broadly across the organization. Ensure clarity and responsible time. I'm sorry, I got distracted. Ensure clarity of goals, responsibility, and timelines. Make sure you ensure multiple communication channels for transparency. Because what happens, you tell someone, it's kind of like telephone. What gets translated down the line doesn't always work. So when you play telephone, tell the person at the one end of the table, but also tell the person at the other end of the table. And hopefully by saturation, the information gets out enough. I mentioned Amy Freeman earlier. Another thing she told me was sometimes you got to say something more than once for people to hear it. My grandma used to say the same thing. Engage stakeholders through discussions and feedback, and reinforce organizational commitment to 21st century client and employee expectation. 21st century client and employee expectation. I cannot stress this step enough. We tend to be creatures of habit and creatures of comfort. And one of my favorite quotes is by Grace Hopper, Admiral Grace Hopper, who said, "The biggest impediment to progress is that we've always done it this way." This line of reinforced organization commitment to 21st century client and employee expectations is key. While something may be comfortable for me, it may not be comfortable to the workforce that I'm trying to bring in. So I think it's important that we keep that in mind. Okay, so I can go to the next slide. All right. So when you're working on your strategic planning process, then the ninth step is the step of implementation and monitoring. So you've implemented your plan, you launch initiatives according to your plan timelines, you track your progress with clear metrics and performance indicators. So if you have a 5-year plan, you should have check-ins. I like annual check-ins to make sure that people are progressing to execute the plan that they've written. I like to make sure that their body can cash the check they wrote. Identify challenges, because while the strategic plan is a plan, it's not a static plan. It should be an organic plan that is flexible enough that when you see that something is not working, you can make adjustments to it to improve it. So that's why it's important to identify challenges and adjust tactics as needed. It also allows you to maintain accountability through the regular reporting process. So if someone's plan just appears to be a plan that's written and not executed, the accountability piece allows you to modify and address that. And it also allows you to celebrate milestones and early success to sustain momentum. Because when there's success, then folks feel more inclined to continue to contribute in a meaningful way to it. I'm going to push through the 10th step, which is evaluate and adjust. So the ongoing evaluation and outcomes and impact are necessary. Continue to use your data to assess your progression towards goals. Adjust strategies and tactics based on evidence and feedback. Continue to engage with stakeholders in reviewing outcomes and lessons learned. And you need to continue to ensure improvement and alignment with evolving needs of your plan. Then the last step is the institutional change. So the institutionalization of the change. So are you embedding inclusive excellence and social impact practices into the core operations of your organization? 5 years from when you execute your plan, or whenever the timeline for your strategic planning process ends, these are the things you're going to look for. Are they embedded? Have you updated policies and systems and procedures to sustain progress? Are you starting to see that a culture, you're fostering a culture for inclusion, equity, and accountability? Are you providing ongoing training and leadership development? So all the things you stated maybe in your plan that you were going to try to achieve. And then are you ensuring that your organization remains adaptive and committed over time? And the most important thing, remains viable. You want your organization to be viable. So these are the 11 steps as I see them that are essential and critical to strategic planning. And with that, I want to share my last slide with you, and maybe open it up for questions.
Thank you, Wayne. If you have questions, please just put them in the Q&A. I see that some of the questions are already answered. Um,
I don't see them. If I just saw a comment from Leah. Leah, thank you.
okay, there's a question from Jason. Jason said, I hear a lot about leadership shifting to a coaching mentality for their managers and above. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of these changes are driven by the incoming workforce. Like, I think the incoming workforce, the 21st century workforce are a lot more vocal about their needs and what they need to have job satisfaction. So and I think one of the things that comes out is they don't do. There's some really great books, and they're quickly becoming outdated on Generation Zers, millennials, the people who are entering the workforce now, and how they think and how they learn, and what platforms they use to perform in the job. And one of the things they want is they want to contribute. And I think directive is not as effective approach with them. And a coaching model is definitely one that is necessarily. And I think as leaders, we need to evolve too. What works for us may not work for others. I see it in my own family where I see multi-generational interactions, and the way my parents talk with me is very different than how they even talk to their grandkids. Well, my parents don't have grandkids, but the way others talk to their grandkids or their great grandkids, because it's like, hey, how come I didn't get that nice treatment? But that's how it goes. You do better when you know better. Okay, I see Rob Carr here saying, can you speak to the tendency of organizations to consume themselves with operations at the expense for strategy? How does one break that inertia? I think, Rob, I was just talking about that today. When organizations move away from their core competencies and they become too aspirational and they want to do too much, then that can happen, Robert. I think that you become, or when you don't focus enough on process excellence and you focus too much on outcomes, then you become more of a doer. Managers become doers. If you don't take a step away from time to time to look at that 10,000, 15,000 foot level, it becomes hard to not continue to be reactive, like head down and never looking up to see what's in front of you. What are the strategic changes that you need to adjust to be viable, right? So, yeah, it's important. And then, Rob, one of the byproducts is people lose sight of what the strategic goals are. And if you don't know what they are, you can't perform to them. Does your evaluation process, is your total evaluation process based off of your strategic goals? If I'm HR, I want to be able to ask anyone who's part of my organization, whether you have 3, 5 strategic goals, the question for each person during the evaluation process: how do you think you've contributed to these organizational strategic goals? Did you meet expectations? Did you not meet expectations? Did you exceed expectations? And tell me why, and give me examples of how. I think that's the essence of effective strategic planning. But when you stop focusing on your strategic goals, then you get what you described, Rob. You get a tendency for the organization to consume themselves with operations at the expense of strategy. Rochelle, if I got that right, asked, can we get a summary of the 11th step? Sure. If you buy the book, sorry, shameless plug, that we wrote a couple of years ago, there's there's an 11-step guide that's specifically to diversity strategic planning, but I think that I can create a summary that's focused more on 21st century strategic planning approaches, or I would love to have a conversation with you to share them with you. Leah asks, what happens when we are coaching leaders to support staff goals and strategic planning, and we find that the leaders need additional facilitation support? Yeah, I think leaders need coaching too. Let me say that, Leah. I think that sometimes we promote leaders based on their technical proficiency and not enough on their ability to lead. So leaders need ongoing coaching to know how to be facilitators and to be coaches of the people they lead. So coaching the coaches on how to coach is just as important. I hope that answers your question. Erica asks, should you have a strategic goal for the whole organization, then narrow it down to the individual departments? So my take on it is, you should have an overarching strategic goal that could be aspirational. Like if you look at what the approach we've taken here at Michigan Tech is like, yeah, there's overarching strategic goals. And then each unit figures out, like you can have, let's say, 7 thematic areas of strategic aspirations, but what may apply to Department A may not apply to Department C or D. But collectively, these goals apply to all, where some units have more ownership of specific goals. And Erica, I'm maybe being too theoretical here, but if for example, Department A goal 3 and goal 4 aspirational, let's call them challenges. Let's not call them goals. Let's say your organization has 7 challenges, okay? And you need to develop a strategic solution to them. You develop 5 strategic goals that have emerged out of your assessment of your organization, but your department may really focus on addressing the strategic goal 2 and 3. Then yeah, rather than creating a separate strategic plan, you need to figure out how your department can support strategic goal X. And where you are going to contribute is more in the action plan and the key performance indicators to support the strategic goal, if that makes sense. Erica, if I haven't answered your question, let me know. If I have, let me know. Or if you want to have a further conversation about it, I welcome it. Give me some sort of indication, Erica, if I did okay. Are there any more questions? I don't see any more at this point. But I'm here to answer as many questions.
Yeah, there is one question. How can leaders balance immediate workforce needs with long-term goals for inclusion and organizational sustainability?
I think it starts when you begin interviewing them. When you interview a person to become part of your organization, the question you ask them in the interview process have to be designed to see if you can get buy-in from them into your organizational values and strategic vision. During that process, because during the interview process, it's not just, so if you're going to ask questions that have nothing to do with your organizational vision and the core competencies of the job, then you're going to struggle hiring the right people. That's one thing. The second part of this is when you need to communicate, just like they're interviewing them, they're interviewing you. So you have to be clear and authentic about your organizational goals and vision, because they need to opt in or out just as well. If they make a decision to join your organization and you make a decision to hire them, then there's some level of alignment in values and strategic goals and vision that matches their their vocational aspiration and their career aspiration. From there, it should be easier to be able to get buy-in. So can you repeat the question again, Halima? Because I want to make sure I didn't miss the last part of it.
Okay. It said, how can leaders balance immediate workforce needs with long-term goals for inclusion and organizational sustainability?
So if you at the front end set the expectations, it goes a long way, and you continue to have these conversations proactively in your organization, then you get to organizational viability and sustainability. Because why do people leave an organization? They don't see themselves in the organization anymore. The organization they recognize and remember that they signed up for has deviated from the reality that they're experiencing at the moment. So therefore, it's important that you continue to have these conversations and you continue to foster and promote the vision of the organization so that they continue to see themselves in it. And that in itself leads to organizational viability.
Thank you. And there is the last question, if you would like to go with it, or
let me just Rob, I see your comment. Can you speak to the inclination of organization to create strategies that reflect servicing everyone everywhere all at once versus making choices about focused limited resources? Yeah, Rob, you have to be able to be pragmatic. What are the resources I have? And with these limited resources, what should I prioritize? If you try to be the jack of all trades, you're master of none. So stick to your core competencies. And if you have to contract to stay viable, then that's something you have to organize. The main thing is to keep your workforce performing at a higher level. So that's the question you have to solve. Let me respond to Rochelle. Rochelle put people leave not the organization a lot of time. I'm not sure what that comment is, but in fact, Halima, you had one more question. Can you post that, and that'll be the last question, I guess, huh?
that's all. I mean, Bob, question in the QA, and you already mentioned it.
Yeah. Now, Rochelle, I'm not sure what your last comment is. I don't know if it got cut off, but I want to thank everyone for giving me the time and a platform to share my thoughts. I hope this was beneficial to do. Yeah, I think I see Rochelle's point now. So that people leave managers, not leaders. Yeah, I'm going to tell you guys a little secret that's worked for me. It's not a secret. It's my reality. I got all my 3 degrees from Penn State. I have a master's in counselor education. It's never the job, it's always the people. You got to know your people. You got to know what makes them tick. You got to make sure what motivates them, and you need to be able to leverage that to get them to have outcomes. If you, as a leader, fail to understand that, they leave your organization, and then you have talent gaps. So I'll stop there. Marcia, do you want me to push through the last 2 slides?
Time is up. So yes, you can pull them up, and I will just thank you. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you so much, participants. On behalf of our OD&C Workforce Education Program, we hope that you enjoyed the session today. If we did not answer your question or we did not get to your questions, please send us an email or reach out to the presenter. You can do it directly through email. For further webinars, we would appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. Please take the survey using the link in the chat box or by scanning the QR code. Our next webinar, Radical Retention, How to Attract, Lead, and Retain Multi-Generational Talent, presented by Dr. Dave Delaney, will take place on Friday, October 31st, 2025, from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. For registration, For all our events are free, so our webinars are always free, and they can be found on our website. You can also find us on our social media platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope to see you soon and have a good day or good night to our guests from other time zones.
Thank
Thank you.